Hello, everybody. Happy Sunday. This is Josh, owner of Chicago Johnny's and author of the Chicago Pizza Cookbook, available at the link listed there. We're going to work on page 48 today. I'm going to make my Malnatis style recipe. Exclusively a deep dish. Not exclusively, but we're going to go with deep dish. If you do it, you can do a thin crust. You want to get like a real wide pan, a pizza pan essentially. Go real thin with it and pinch the edges. And you can do a thin crust on it, but you got to bake it pretty long. Today we're going to do deep dish. We will start by going through the motions of making the dough. Obviously, I already have mine because you want to make it in advance. So this was made about 4 days ago. The one we're going to use today. But for now, let's make dough. If you're unfamiliar with Malnatis deep dish in particular, it's very fat-heavy dough. Corn oil gives a big part of the crust flavor, and then there's butter crust, which we're going to do today. And so instead of using olive oil in the recipe, we're going to use butter, and then you're going to get butter crust. Let's see what we got with this light here. There we go. Well, better. There we go. Got some light now. So like I was saying, Malnatis crust is a very fat-heavy crust. Corn oil is a big part of the flavor. Sarasota flour is a big part of the texture. And then butter is also a big part of the flavor. So we're going to substitute the olive oil for butter. We're still going to use corn oil. And we're going to have fantastic flavor on this pizza. We're going to start with the yeast. So it's 1 gram of yeast. And if you don't have a kitchen scale, they're relatively cheap, $10. Definitely get one. Especially if you're doing baking or pizza making, weigh your ingredients as much as you can because you're going to get better results, more consistent results. So we put our 1 gram of yeast, and then we will do our water. 120 grams is about 1/2 cup if you don't have a scale, but like I said, get a scale. Perfect. So we have 1 gram of yeast, 120 grams of water. Give it a stir. And because this dough is going to sit for at least 3 days, we prefer, in the fridge, we're not going to add any sugar. So the yeast, this is active dry yeast. It's not instant, it's active, but you could use either. Hit it with the water, stir it. I know it's live because I just used it yesterday, but normally you proof it and let it sit and make sure it smells like a bakery and you're proofed and all that, but we're not going to do that today because I know it's active yeast, it's alive. All right, next we have flour. So we're going to use Sarasota brand flour. It's very common out in the Midwest. The East, it's Pecker's brand flour. It's the same brand, it's just different. Same product, just different brand labels. Oh boy. Sarasota. So we're going to use 280 grams. It comes out to about 2 cups plus 2 tablespoons, but obviously, again, we're going to weigh it. We'll zero out our scale. See if I have enough in here. Close. You could add your fat if you want to at this point, before the flour. I was doing the flours in front of me, so why not? Add our flour, we're going to add salt. And if you're used to making pizza, you're wondering why the hell am I adding salt right now? It's about 1.5 grams of salt. if you're used to making pizza or breads or doughs in general, you usually add your salt in at the end, so you could allow the gluten to build up long strands. For Chicago dough, we want real crispy, so you want those short gluten strands, kind of tight. So the salt prevents them from becoming uh, long gluten strands. So put that in early, and then we prevent the long gluten strands, which gives you like more of a New York pole, Neapolitan style. You get like that pole, or yeah, that's pretty much it. All right, so now we have to do our fats. So we did our salt, 1.5 grams. We did our yeast, 1 gram. Did our water, 120 grams. Now we're going to do our fats, which are corn oil, and we're going to substitute butter for the olive oil. So we'll start with the butter. And we're going to do 15 grams of butter. Perfect. And the corn oil, there's a lot of corn oil in this, 35 grams. And this is going to give us a little over 400 grams of dough, 450 grams of dough. You don't have to use all of it. You can use all of it. That's what they typically use. But I'll show you. We'll roll it out. We'll trim it back a little bit. And we'll probably end up somewhere between 3 and 350 grams for this recipe. But you can use the whole thing if you want. You like a little thicker, heavier, denser pizza. We're going to cut it a little bit. It's really up to you how you want to do it. The thinner you go, the crisper and less dense you're going to be, obviously. Actually, leave this out and we'll see where we hit with the final scale. If you do pick up this book, this is from page 48, the Chicago Pizza Cookbook by me. It's the Malnatis style recipe. A lot of these recipes, if you're making just one thin crust, you're at about 200 grams of dough total. And so if you go that route, you want to start with the paddle in the mixer instead of the hook. The paddle is going to form like crumbles, essentially, like you're making pie crust. Take the paddle out, put the hook in, and once the flour starts to absorb some of that water, that hydration, it'll turn into more of a dough. A very low hydration dough is Chicago style dough, because we like real thin, crispy pizza. Neapolitan and New York is kind of just like a crisp outside and then like a chewy dough inside. We kind of eliminate the chewy dough inside. And that's a broad statement, obviously. That's not to each their own. And there are places that don't do that. But typically, that's how we do it. Let me get a container for this dough. So this is a loose dough. I'm just labeling this so that I know what it is. Today's Sunday. Because we're just going to make the dough so I can show you the process of it. And then we're going to use the dough I already made about 4 or 5 days ago. So we're going to age the dough for 2 reasons here. One, we want the flour to really absorb that hydration, that water. And 2, we want a little bit of funk. So the longer you refrigerate your dough and slowly ferment it, the more funky, kind of like a real strong cheese would be. And so we want a combination of both of those things. Also, with the hydrating process, we will end up with a crisper product at the end. And that's really what we're looking for. Refill Sarasota. So anyway, while this is kneading, got another minute or so here. I'm Josh Downey, author of the Chicago Pizza Cookbook. It's available at the link below. We're working off of page 48 and 49. This is my Malnatis style recipe. There's a bunch of recipes in here, techniques, experiments that I had done, stories of my life, whatnot. How I got here to where I am today. If you have watched some of the lives before, you saw Uncle Pepper's Crispy Chicago Dough. This works for thin crust and deep dish. I just actually made the thin crust yesterday. It was super crispy. There's a picture on Facebook. You can look up Chicago Johnny's. I'm holding it up by one finger. It's a 12-inch thin crust. That's how crisp it was. But today we're doing Malnatis. We're doing butter crust deep dish. I have one in the oven right now that's sausage and mushroom. And then I'm going to show you we're going to make a pepperoni. Not a huge fan of pepperoni, but if I put pepperoni in it, somebody will eat it, and then it won't go to waste. All right, we're getting there. It's pretty close. It's hot in here today. Heat wave, we're up to like 30 something. Mid 30s, some shit like that. There we go. Starting to come together. Basically, what we're looking for with this dough in particular is for it to come together. It's a very fat, heavy dough, like I was saying before, so you can see you get like a coating on here. So this is a container. I didn't oil the container because there's so much fat in this dough. So I just put it right in here. No oil, no flour, nothing like that. You can see the oil separation. Real nice and spongy dough. And once we roll it out, it'll be, if you ever made pie or pastries, it'll be more like a pastry dough than a pizza dough that you're probably used to if you're not doing Chicago style dough. All right. So this dough we just made, obviously. I'll show you a couple of things here. First off, it looks more like cauliflower than it does like a real smooth dough ball like you get in the Neapolitan or New York style pizza. This is pretty normal for all the recipes in my book because it's low hydration. And I put the hydration percentage on here, and we're at 42% hydration, 17% fat. 17% fat is very high for a dough if you're used to making pizzas. And 42% hydration is very low if you're used to making pizzas, except for here in the Midwest. So this dough we just made, very cauliflower-like, or like a brain, I guess. So I just loosely form it into a ball. And this dough, because it's so high fat content, it's very much like Play-Doh, except it's got a little more sponge to it, a little more pushback, I guess. So with this recipe in particular, you never want to do it the same day. So we made the dough. I'm going to leave it out on the counter. It's going to be about 2.5, 3 times the size in 4 to 6 hours. I'll knock it down, recover it, and I'll put it in the fridge for 2, 3, 4 days, and then we'll use it. So after we do that, we end up with this. So this was left on the counter about 6 hours, knocked it down, put it in the fridge about 4 days. Then I took it out about 5 hours ago. I'm running late today. And this is what we look like. Now you could smell it. It smells like yeast because the yeast is in there, but it had like a deeper funk to it. So it smells almost like you added like a Romano cheese to it. And that comes from the aging process in the fridge. The slower you can age it, the slower you can ferment it, the more funk you're going to get. So this ends up being about 453 grams of dough. Like I said, we're going to be a little less than, probably going to end up at like 350, 400 by the time we get done, but we're going to roll it out. So flour your surface. And you don't have to roll it out. I'm doing this because it's a little easier process. And this way you guys will see it. But you could just take this, kind of pinch it into a disc and put it right in the pan and work out the second step that we'll get to. But for today, we're going to roll it out so we can trim it a little bit. And you can see, because of the low hydration and the high fat content, this dough just rolls out very much like pastry dough. And you're going to end up, well, I like to end up, you can end up wherever you want. I like to end up a little over 1/8 of an inch thick. And we're using a 9-inch pan, cake pan. So go a little over. And you don't have to be precise with this, especially with the deep dish. because the next step I'm going to show you here, we force it in with our hands. So this is just a 9-inch cake pan. I'm going to butter it to prevent the dough from sticking, obviously. I usually end up about 10 to 12 grams of butter on the pan. But find out what works for you and go with it. So I end up with a buttered cake pan. You could use another fat content if you want. I suggest, especially if you're starting out making pizza, deep dish pizza, use a solid fat, so butter, lard, shortening, or refined coconut oil, because it is more forgiving when you go to put this next step. When you put the dough into the pan, the solid fats seem to be more forgiving. So we'll take our dough sheet, drape it over our pan. Then we're just going to kind of let it sit for a minute and relax. Not a minute. That's a term I overuse, I suppose. Sit for a few moments. And I actually put a deep dish in already. Right before I went live, I made a sausage and mushroom one. So we're going to go through the motions. I'll put this in the oven. I'll pull that one out. Hopefully about the same time. It should be about the same time. So again, this is page 48 out of the Chicago Pizza Cookbook. It's available with the links on there. This is my Malnatis recipe. We do the altered butter crust version, which is in the book. We made the dough. We rolled it out after we aged it. Then we buttered a 9-inch deep cake pan. Now, this is a heavy-duty cake pan. I like this one better. It's a Nordic ware. It's on, if you get the book, there's a link to like a shopping list on Amazon and Walmart. These pans are on both of those. The other regular cake pans, you get like a Wilton cake pan or something from the store. A little too thin for me. I don't like them. This holds the heat a little better, and we just get a better result in the end. So what I'm doing now, trying to get the air bubbles out of the bottom because we buttered it. Then we laid the dough in, so we're not giving anywhere for the air to escape to. So that timer was for 20 minutes. I have the first one in the oven, and we'll get to that point. All I'm doing is rotating the pizza. Oh. And we'll get to that point with this pizza, so you'll see everything. But we're trying to get the dough to lay on the pan without the air bubbles. Sometimes it takes a little finagling. Sometimes it doesn't. And then we're going to do a couple of things here. We want the dough to fully be attached to the pan, essentially. And then we're going to trim the excess. I'm not putting any pressure on down. I'm putting pressure sideways. Because I don't want to really dull my knife any more than I have to. And then, so we started with 453 grams of dough, which you can use to make a full deep dish. It's not a big deal. You just get a little more dough on it, and it'll be a little less crisp. And we took 130 off, so we're at like 320, 330, which is where I thought we'd be. So I'm going to mix it actually with the dough from the pizza I have in the oven right now, the trimmings. And then I will let it come together a little bit, and I'll throw it back in the fridge, and maybe tomorrow we'll make one. All right, so now also with deep dish, we do cheese first. Cheese is under the toppings and under the tomatoes. Lou Malnatis uses only whole milk mozzarella. I like to mix in some provolone, um, especially doing this live for two reasons. One, it's going to give me a better base layer because we're going to add pepperoni in this case, but you do your toppings and your tomatoes. And the more moisture, the more wet that hits the bottom of your dough, the less crisp you're going to be. So I like to layer like this. And if you can get whole milk mozzarella from the deli and sliced, you can do the same thing with just the mozzarella then. I have provolone on hand, so I'm using provolone. But the cheese will melt, and then it'll prevent the grease from the pepperoni and the liquid from the tomatoes from really getting to the bottom of the pizza. And that will result in a crisper crust, which is what we're going for. It's not like super thin. Actually, I'll measure it for you. Or not super thick, sorry. We're between an eighth and 3/16 in thickness. And that's consistent on the sides and the bottom. So this is just shredded whole milk mozzarella that I had from my thin crust day yesterday. And if you watch, if you're on YouTube or if you live around here, you can go see it. They call it a cheese pull when they're pulling the deep dish pizza with the spatula, and they pull it up and you get the stringy on the sides. That's this cheese. That's the whole milk mozzarella. And it's low moisture whole milk mozzarella, which is a very, very important distinction. If you don't get the low moisture whole milk mozzarella, you'll get more of a gooey mess. Which for deep dish you can do, for thin crust you do not want. But for deep dish, do it. All right, let's see where we got so far. So we went through the motions making Lou Malnati's deep dish dough. We have that out here. Yep, all right, we did that. Then we took the dough that I made a few days ago. We rolled that out pretty thin, about 1/8 inch. Buttered a 9-inch deep cake pan. And then draped the dough in, got all the air bubbles out, and pressed it against the pan sides. And then we added our provolone and now our whole milk mozzarella, low moisture. And then now you would put your toppings. When I say toppings, they're more like fillings for a deep dish. So if you're doing sausage, you would do that now. And that would go in raw, like a thin layer, thin patty, or little pieces if you want to. But you do that on top of the cheese and then the other toppings. So if we were doing sausage, we would do sausage and then this pepperoni. I prefer, I don't remember if this is Kretschmar or whatever, but from the deli, you get these bigger pieces of pepperoni. I feel like it's much better quality than the little pieces, for one. And for another, you really layer them in there, kind of like I did with the cheese. The real thin pepperoni, I'm not a huge pepperoni on pizza fan. I like it on cold cut sandwich every now and again, but pizza, I feel like it's overpowering, and I am in the minority for that, I know. If I had a choice, generally would prefer like salami or supersad, something with a little more depth in it. But okay, so we have our pepperoni on top of our cheese. And then this is a big step that you have to do. So what I did on the first one that's in there's whole peeled plum tomatoes in a can. I crushed it up with like a meat masher, a little looks like a mallet with spindles on it, so you could smash stuff. Mash those up, and then I put them through a strainer, and we remove the liquid. And this is from two 28-ounce cans because I have one in the oven, and we got one ready to go here. This is how much came out of 2 cans, so it's almost 2 cups. Almost 2 cups. So that's the liquid we removed, and that's important because we want a crispy pizza. So the more moisture we can get out of there, the more the oven can do its work and kind of crisp up the dough. So we want to remove moisture if we can. We did that. The ones in the oven are Alta Cucina brand. That's the number of big cans you get for the restaurants. These are fire roasted. I forget what the brand is. These are just diced. The other ones are whole peeled plums. I had to break them up. These are just diced. I strained them, but they're just diced. I don't really have to crush them. We're gonna add. Ends up being about 3/4 of a can, and you'll find your preference for what you like. If you do pick up the Chicago Pizza Cookbook, I go through a lot of the process of making it your own. Find what you like, stick with it, adapt to it. You don't have to do everything the way I do it. I don't do everything the way anybody else does it. I find what I like, I kind of stick with it. So this is what's left from a 28-ounce can. A little over half a cup, 2/3 of a cup probably. And that's after we strain all the liquid out, remember. The reason I like fire roasted tomatoes is the pepperoni. This recipe for Malnatis is very well rounded, so I like them simple usually. So the one in the oven is just Italian sausage and mushroom. Didn't really do anything to it. This is pepperoni, which is already like a strong flavor. So fire roasted tomatoes kind of enhance that, help it. Fire roasted tomatoes also go really well with the spinach. If you were to do that, they would go well with mushrooms. Those darker flavors, those things that are a little more intense. But for the first one, I did whole peeled plum tomatoes, and that'll be coming out of the oven here in about 6 minutes. 10 minutes. Like I said, because this is a very well-rounded combination of the one in the oven, the light and bright tomatoes, the whole peeled plum, and then fatty crust, the corn oil and the butter. You get a lot of like bright, earthy. So I kind of think of flavors in like a grid, like XY grid, and on the bottom left would be like the real dark. I don't know, like a balsamic plum would be over there, right? And then over here, in the bottom half to the right, you would get more of the still dark, but not as intense. So like a cherry, like a dried cherry would be over here. The upper section is more brightness. So they look at like the brightness going up and down, and the darkness and earthiness kind of going left and right. And so like the top left of the grid is more like your raw, like your garlic, raw onion, stuff like that. If you sauteed onion, they'd be towards the middle, and then if you really caramelize them, they'd be down and to the right a little bit. So I kind of look at things like a chart like that. Sounds kind of messed up, and one day maybe I'll get it on paper. There's probably some other people that think like that. But the fire roasted tomatoes would be on the bottom half, so a little darker. The whole peeled plum tomatoes are on the top half because they're bright, acidic, a little more fresh tasting. So just maybe one day I'll get that down. If anybody else thinks in those terms, let me know, because I don't think there's probably not a whole lot of us out there. Would not surprise me if I was the only one. Oh, so this was a Romano cheese that just grated on top. Oh, that brings me to my next to this. What I was talking about. So the darker, earthier flavors. So the fire roasted tomatoes kind of changed the game on this pizza, where the other one's very bright and light. So the other one, very simple seasoning. I actually used my Chicago Johnny's Perfect Pizza seasoning, which is available on Amazon and Walmart. My website, chicagojohnny's.com. But this is very basic, simple seasoning. So we use that on here. But the alternative is just a little crushed red pepper or oregano and Romano. That's how I think Lou's just tops it. It's just oregano, dried oregano, crushed red pepper, and Romano cheese. But today we'll use Perfect Pizza seasoning by me, Chicago Johnny's, which has oregano, crushed red pepper, basil, sea salt, granulated garlic, granulated onion. It's a little more rounded, which we can do on here because I got the pepperoni, the fire roasted tomatoes. Remember I said this is a different flavor combination than the one that's in the oven is. We're going to start a live cooking called Dinner with Downey. Dinner with Downey. It's on Facebook and YouTube and TikTok right now. I'm just setting everything up. It'll be on Tuesdays, 7 o'clock. I'll cook different dishes. And I'll get the recipes up online for them. I'll have a couple guests over. Chit chat back and forth. It's basically a blatant ripoff and mix of Bert Kreischer's Something's Burning and David Shank's Dinner Time Live. Just trying to think of what I could do and how I could. I love to entertain. I love to cook for people. I love to host. And I find myself on this side of the counter. Like, this is my passion. This is what I like doing. So I get a couple people over there, people I know from my life. Just have a conversation and cook. I'll get to serve them and get some feedback on stuff. I'm looking forward to it. So it'll be Tuesdays, 7 o'clock. It's going to be called Dinner with Downey. I'm Josh Downey. I wrote this cookbook, the Chicago Pizza Cookbook. It's available on Amazon. I think there's a link on what you're watching. We made page 48, which is my in the style of Lou Malnatis pizza. Which now that enough time has elapsed, because I have one in the oven already that we'll pull out here in a minute. The temperature in this room is probably like 70, 75. Relatively cool compared to like a pizza place. If you're in the kitchen at a pizza joint, it is like, especially in the summer, it's blazing hot. So you got to pay attention to how long the dough sits out, because you get like a nice rise out of it. We're relatively cold, so I'm not worried about the dough. I mean, you could feel the bottom of this pan is chilly, you know. So I'm not worried about the dough really getting wild on us while I'm waiting for the other one to come out of the oven. But in the summer, you definitely want to pay attention to that. Or if you're running in a hot kitchen, pay attention to how long you're letting your pan sit out before you put it in the oven. So it's going to keep proofing and rising, and you could end up with a very doughy pizza, even though you're not really going for that. So this one will still come out real thin and crispy because of the temperature here in the kitchen. Ideally, if this was very warm, this would already been in the oven, like as soon as I was done with it. Because I don't want to give it that time to really poof. We'll do it in the oven. It'll get a little bit of oven spring, just a little bit. But that's it. You don't want like a whole lot, unless you want that focaccia-like style, which would be like a Pequod's or a Bert's or Uncle Jerry's. Like those fattier focaccia-like breads. Or if you want the doughy stuff like Rosati's, you would let it sit out. It wouldn't matter as much. You want that bready stuff like Giordano's or Rosati's would have. This one in particular, we don't want that, so we would pay more attention to it. Like I said, it's colder in here, so it's not really an issue. If you're local to the Chicago area, Jewel Lasco stores carry my olive oil jardiniere. and my Midwestern cherry bourbon barbecue sauce. So the barbecue sauce is in with the barbecue sauce in the aisle, and the jardiniere is in with the jardiniere. There's a hot and a mild version, both made with olive oil, and I spiced the hell out of it. And so, if you're familiar with jardiniere, it's usually more like a cloudy clear. Well, it sounds counterproductive, but there's not a color to it, and it's cloudier. This is pretty clean looking, but also very rich in color. You can see it's the longer it sits, the more it looks like motor oil. They use a ton of seasonings in here and olive oil. So very different than pretty much all the other jardiniere you're going to see out there. It's got my face on it, so easy to find. 2 minutes. Actually, this is a good time. I'll just check it just for shits and giggles. Oh, it's looking good. It's looking real good. So we have the oven set at 450. I'm going to add 3 minutes to this. So we have the oven set at 450 for deep dish. And there's not a stone in there. This is just on the rack. And I have a diagram on how you would set up the oven if you're making thin crust compared to deep dish. Where are we at here? There it is. So for a deep dish, you put a rack just slightly below center, and that's where the pan's going to go. And then 2 racks above that, usually 2 slots above that, you put the other rack, and then you can either put a stone in there or a piece of aluminum foil or aluminum foil with the shiny side down, so it's reflecting the heat back onto the top of the pizza. And that's going to help eliminate some of that moisture that I was talking about earlier. That's for a deep dish. If you're doing a thin crust, if you have 2 stones, which I do, I put one as high up as I can go and one as low down as I can go. And what happens is you'll bake on the low one, and sometimes that's all you have to do. But if you say you overload a pizza with cheese or too many toppings, you could finish it on the top, and that heat from the top of the oven will really hit and like brown the cheese better. So sometimes I'll finish the last minute or 2 minutes up on top, but for the most part, just on the bottom. And you're at 500 degrees for thin crust, and 450 for deep dish. The only thing with deep dish is I usually rotate it about halfway through. So about 20 minutes, rotate it, and then bake it another 15 to 25 minutes, depending on how much stuff you put into it. So there's a different setup for your oven. And so when I'm cooking, I usually do one or the other. I don't try to do deep dish and thin crust on the same day, because it's just too much of a pain in the ass to move the hot racks, hot stones. Steps on making your dough, and this is a wonderful drawing by me. Very talented, multi-talented guy. And then if you get the cookbook, there's some artwork by Jason Newman. We were going to do a whole storyline on my life, and I just kind of flaked. So we got a couple of pictures in here. Beautiful work, Jason Newman. So these are just stories inspired by my childhood, and I go into them a little bit in the page before that, talking about my more creative and artistic side. Recipes, and then changing out the fat types and hydration types, which is pretty much the most significant thing you could do in altering the flavor of your pizza and the texture is the fat type. So I started experimenting. I used duck fat, bacon fat, corn oil, olive oil, butter, mixes of them, egg yolk, refined coconut oil, lard, shortening. They all worked out. I can't think of, the only thing that didn't work out was just using straight up egg yolk. It burned. It just wouldn't hold. You just couldn't bake it long enough to burn off. But if you take an egg yolk and you mix it with refined coconut oil or lard, you get a wonderful tasting, crispy, and like that mouth coating of the fat with that combination. Fucking fantastic. The other more significant one, and this is gimmicky, so I don't really do it a lot. I'm going to do it this Thursday, actually, at WGN. I'll be on in the morning. It is a cheese fat dough. So, like I said, you could replace basically any fat type that you want in any dough recipe. But just playing around one day, and I was making cheese crisps for my nephew. He likes to eat them, like, calls them crackers, cheese crackers. And I baked a bunch off, and I was collecting the grease from the pan. I was like, I'm going to save this to do something with it. I used it in a dough, and it turned out so fucking good. It tastes like a better cheddar crust, which is, again, it's unique. I call them novelty pizzas because they're not stuff you make all the time. So that was one of the novelty pizzas. I've used jardiniere oil, which is great, and that's less novelty because that actually you don't have to go through a whole process to make it. I have a cornmeal crust, which is probably the most requested people asking me. So if you've been one of the people asking for the cornmeal crust recipe, it's in the book. And then there's one other novelty style pizza. We'll get back to that. All right. So that one is done. We'll take the pizza we just made. I'm going to put it in the oven. I'll set a timer for 20 minutes. I'll turn it in 20 minutes. I'll rotate it. And then I'll put it in for another 15 to 25 minutes. This just being the pepperoni probably only needs 20 minutes. After that, so it'll be in for a total of 40. Set the timer. All right, so I'll get to that pizza we just pulled out in a second. Let me set it over here. So again, you can get this 9-inch cake pan. This is Nordic ware. And if on the beginning of the book, I have QR codes that go to my Amazon shopping list and Walmart shopping list, where all this stuff is listed at. So it's a 9-inch thick cake pan, and then these clamps are in there too. I don't know what these are called. Pan clamps. Doesn't have any. Oh, deep dish pan clamp. So it allows you to grab the pan without having to use two hands. But the bigger the pan you go, because you can get these 14 inches, 16 inches, you probably want two hands. I mean, this is heavy. I wonder actually what this weighs. Obviously, we have pan weight here. How can I do this? I have to weigh it on here. So I can take this, and zero it out, and we'll weigh that when you pull it out of the pan. So another thing about deep dish, when you pull it out, you want to let it rest 3, 4, 5 minutes before you try to pull it out of the pan. It's very susceptible to cracking if you don't wait that long. We're just kind of letting everything settle, kind of like you would do a roast or a steak or turkey or something like that. Kind of like everything settle together, and then we'll take it out. Which reminds me, there's not, especially if you're starting out, there is not an easy way to get it out. And the way I would describe it, you're more removing, and we'll get to that here in a second, you're more removing the pan from the pizza than the pizza from the pan. And so if you can get a smaller spatula like I have, this one's about 1.5 inches, 2 inches wide. And it is, my spatulas are just gone, huh? The shit, man. That's exaggerated. I don't want to do that. I think they're all in the dishwasher right now. Ran a load before I went live. Well, you don't want I have some that are about that thick, at least twice as wide. You don't want to use those because you're going to crack the crust and you're not going to be able to get under it. So with the thinner one, and actually if you have a deeper offset, it'd be easier. But with the thinner one, we're going to work our way around it, try to get under. And if you look, you're at this angle and you're going into the pan. This is the amount of surface touching the dough. With the other one, if you had a big spatula, you could see how much surface you're touching because it's a round outside. You can't really get it in there. The other one's more like this thickness. So I'm at a 45-degree angle trying to get under there. That much surface area is trying to get in between the round pan and the round crust, and it just doesn't work out that well. So we'll get this out here in a minute. What I was talking about before was one of the novelty recipes. And so in the Chicago area, Italian beef sandwiches, if you're familiar with the show The Bear, very common. So I made beef sandwiches one day. Actually, my brother-in-law gave me some fat from his. So he made beef sandwiches, cooled the gravy, and then the disc on top was the fat disc, and he gave it to me. He's like, maybe you can do something with this. So I used that fat in the dough, which is very intense flavor. It's very good. And then I made like a roux gravy using that fat and beef stock and my Italian beef gravy seasoning, which is also available on Amazon and Walmart and my website, Chicago Johnny's. So these are my two best-selling seasonings. And these are only available online, these two. The Jardiniere, olive oil Jardiniere Hot and Mild, and the Cherry Bourbon Barbecue Sauce are both available at Jewel Osco stores in the Chicago area. And then hopefully these soon. So anyway, season the gravy with the Italian beef gravy seasoning, and I use that roux gravy as a sauce instead of red sauce. So you have the beef fat in the dough, the crust, and then you have the beef fat in the gravy, and it just turns out like you're eating an Italian beef pizza, I guess. And I know Italian beef pizza is a thing, people put beef on the pizza and shit, but like this was like eating a pizza made out of Italian beef as opposed to putting Italian beef on a pizza. So very unique. I don't know if anybody else has even tried that. There's some goofy shit I've tried in the past. The original two recipes, believe it or not, that I was working on was Uncle Pepper's Crispy Chicago Dough. I've done a bunch of videos on. I just put a picture up yesterday. I made one. I was holding the 12-inch pizza with the middle finger. That was it. Like just the whole pizza was held up by one finger. That's how crispy this recipe comes out. But this one I've been working on for about 12 years probably, on and off, and like really honing in on it. And then my semolina whole wheat flour crust was one of the other ones, like day one. I was like, I'm going to play with some flours. What can I get? I really like the earthiness of whole wheat flour. It's a very different experience, the semolina one, than the Uncle Pepper's, but so fucking good. I don't know how to explain it. Dark, earthy flavors. Like I was talking about that chart again, that grid, the X and Y. It's dark, earthy flavors. So it lends well to like a prosciutto, pickled red onion, spinach, sauteed spinach with garlic and butter and Chardonnay. And all that stuff's in here with the toppings parts. So definitely I would pick this up. You can download a copy on my website for like $6. PDF version, just print it out yourself. ChicagoJohnny's.com. Go to Amazon and go to order a paperback or hardcover or the electronic book, the Kindle. You can get a Kindle version of it. And on Amazon, you could also find my products on Amazon and Walmart. So my perfect pizza seasoning, my Italian beef gravy seasoning, my olive oil Jardiniere, which is most common on like Italian beef sandwiches, cold cut sandwiches, stuff like that. That's all available online. So now, moment of truth. Let's see how my wrists are today. Got real jacked up wrists. So like I said, we're going to try and more remove the pan from the pizza than the pizza from the pan. Make sure you're loose. The longer you leave this in here, especially if there's a crack in here, the moisture is going to go soak into the bottom, so it's going to get harder to get out. But you don't want to take it out right away because then everything is loose. So I have it in now with the spatula. I made sure we're kind of loose. I'm going to tip the pan while I kind of wiggle the spatula under the pan. It's not working out very well. Oh, we stuck. Oh, shit, we stuck on the bottom. Let's see if we can salvage this. I let it sit a minute too long. Oh, this is not good. This is not good at all. Pains of going live. All right, now we're loose. Get under, and I'm going to pull the pan away. Pull the pan away, and just kind of let the pizza fall, I guess. So you're pulling the pan away from the pizza more than you're pulling the pizza away from the pan. That's the only way I can think of describe it. And then, oh, we're gonna see what this weighs. This was sausage, Italian sausage, mozzarella, provolone, and sauteed mushrooms. We're at 1,400 grams, which comes to 50.5 ounces. 16, 32, 40. It's like a little over 3 pounds. There's a 9-inch deep dish pan or cake pan. We started with 450 grams of dough, and we only used 120 less than that, so we ended up about 320. And then the tomatoes was whole peeled plum tomatoes. We crushed them by hand, strained them. We used about 3/4 of that can after we strained them. This is the amount of liquid we got out of 2 cans, just to put a reference in there. So you get about a cup of liquid out of each can. And then you get a little bit of leftovers. You can use all of them if you want. Depends how much tomatoes you want. I like about 75% of a can, 3/4 of a can. Seems to be the sweet spot. But while I'm getting into this, when you're cutting a deep dish, you have these high walls from the pan, obviously. If I just go to like cut it, we're gonna break it like it broke here when I was doing the spatula. So when you go to cut a deep dish, you kind of crack it and then cut into it. Crack it and then cut into it. Oh, it's too much. It's too much to hold on this thing, huh? So we're not going to get a cheese pull on here. And the reason is I use provolone mozzarella mix. I like the flavor of that better. If you're going for that presentation, use only whole milk mozzarella, low moisture, and you'll get that big stretch. But because I use provolone as my at least 50% of this, you don't get the big stretch like you would. And the cover of the book, this was whole milk mozzarella. This fucking looks good, man. So this is Josh Downey. I authored the Chicago Pizza Cookbook. It's available in the links below. This is from page 48. This is my Malnatis style recipe. This one's Italian sausage and mushroom. The one that we just made was just pepperoni, and that's in the oven. It'll be about another half hour, so we're not going to wait around for that. Go to my storefront on Amazon and Walmart, and you can find the cake pan that I was talking about. This is a Nordic ware. Made in the U.S. Thick. You know, it's not like a tinny sound because they're real thin cake pans. Get a clamp if you want. It will make your life easier, especially if you're into pizza making. Order some pizza seasoning and some giardiniera. If you're local, go to Jewel Osco stores. They have my olive oil giardiniera and my cherry bourbon barbecue sauce right on the store shelves. Thank you.